it's not just about making the film itself, that the film is a conduit to a conversation we're going to have once it's done. And then that conversation might be a conduit to cultural change.
Welcome to the Rethink Desi Reframe series, where we challenge conventional narratives about social change, sustainability, and the South Asian community. Join me, your host, Arpita Sharma, each week as I have candid conversations with thought leaders, social entrepreneurs, researchers, activists, and creatives as we uncover the strategies, innovations, and stories behind their efforts to reshape our society. My name is Arpita Sharma, and I am your host. And in this week's episode, we are joined by Jyoti Sarada, a seasoned producer with a passion for telling insightful stories. She has an impressive body of work that includes producing many thought-provoking films that resonate with audiences on a profound level. Some of her most notable projects include films such as Equal Means Equal and She Could Be Next, which have garnered acclaim for their insightful exploration of pressing social issues. In this episode, Jyoti shares her invaluable insights into the filmmaking process, her approach to selecting projects, and the importance of representation in storytelling. We'll also dive into her latest venture, a film centered on fair pay activist Lily Ledbetter, and how storytelling can catalyze meaningful conversations leading to societal change. So let's jump right in. You've had extensive experience as a global marketing executive in major studios and brands, as well as in developing impact, creating documentary and narrative content through your company, Nimble Media. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in all of this? From the very beginning.
Well, it's funny. I was thinking about this particular podcast and the themes that you're trying to explore. And so I go back to my father. My father was the only one in his family to decide to travel halfway around the world. I mean, he got a scholarship to Stanford University. It was during a time where this country was actually welcoming immigrants, especially those with a lot of intellectual capital, which he had loads of. And it was here that I was born. I was born in Stanford Hospital. And, my life and the trajectory of my life is different because of the choices he made. But because his choices involved a lot of sacrifice and a lot of work, and I think this is a narrative that rings true for a lot of immigrants or children of immigrants, that, you have to work hard, you have to study, you have to get a good job. And so those are the things that was like part of the mantra, right? You're not here to do other things. And so I did that. That was the focus of a good portion of what I did while I was in this country. I mean, I went and, I got a good degree. I got a master's. I had a series of good jobs and tried to do well in those jobs and tried to, build my career. And, I think I fulfilled my father's sort of directive at that point. But, it was interesting because if you think about my mother, she atypically for an Indian woman, or at least atypically for some of the Indian women that I know, was really strong personality. And so she really taught me to have my own voice. The thing that neither of them talked about was how you use that voice for others who are less fortunate. Like that was something that wasn't necessarily part of the discussion at home. So it was only until later that when I felt myself as an established person, that I felt like I could figure out what to do and how to use my voice to shed light on, the situations that impact a broader number of people.
Yeah. What was your master's in?
Oh, it was an MBA. It's all very classic. I went to USC and I received a master's, sort of a master's in business. My mom and dad really wanted me to become an accountant. So they were really dismayed when I started to shift my attention to marketing because I really didn't think that was a proper career. And then later, much later, I decided to get my master's, my MBA from UCLA. So I've got myself, if any of your listeners are from Los Angeles, I've got myself covered as a Bruin and a Trojan.
They'll be simultaneously happy and sad to hear that.
Maybe I'm just not a true fan. I don't know.
I can imagine from your parents' perspective coming to this realization that you were not following this traditional path that would lead to guaranteed success, and then venturing off into new territory, which they had no idea how to manage or handle, and having to sit there and watch you go through it.
Well, the thing that is interesting is my choice of career actually propelled me further than I think if I had become, first of all, I wasn't going to be an excellent CPA. I mean, I'm good with numbers, but that wasn't going to be my passion. So better to follow your passion. And as it turned out, the choices that I made resulted in the things that they wanted from me. They just wanted me to have security in this country and to build on their success, which I did. Absolutely 100% stand on the shoulders and stand on, I benefited so much from the sacrifices they made. And I think a lot of immigrants' children say the same thing. The thing that's interesting, though, and I wanted to speak to this, is I think a lot of times immigrant populations really feel like they want to keep their head down and they want to, demonstrate their value to their new country and don't want to speak up about the things that might need to change about the country. Now, I think that is shifting in recent years and maybe out of necessity as certain communities are attacked. But we never talked about, sort of activism or, protesting or, we might have been social justice oriented, but the way you dealt with that is by taking care of your own family and helping others from your family to come here and succeed. So that was our form of justice, I suppose.
Yeah. And so I'd love to know, what kind of pushed you kind of then to this transition of then producing content, that is very much focused on political change and social change.
Yes.
In very big ways. Yeah.
Well, so that is really, I'm not saying it wasn't a lot of work to try to, establish a foothold. I started out in advertising, then I built that into, my first job at Fox. And then I built my career by going to Paramount and sort of furthered that. But the real turning point was when I decided to actually quit my job at Paramount, which was, as I've said many times before, a perfectly good job. It was, a great group of people, interesting work, but I felt like I was at a point where I might want to do something different. And also, as the current instability in the media world sort of is evidence, there was always a constant round of layoffs and things like that. So when you start thinking about what would I do if I were laid off, it leads you to conclude, to start to explore those avenues, and then those avenues lead to choices. So in 2016, I just decided to quit my job. And I didn't do that lightly, but I did that thinking, it was time to really evolve from what the work I've been doing at Paramount. I want to say, though, instrumental to that choice, I actually was getting involved in a documentary called Equal Means Equal. And another Desi, Kamala Lopez, she's also Hispanic, or I should say a Latina, but she had apparently not received the immigrant message because she was sort of an activist from the get-go and had learned that, there was the Equal Rights Amendment, which is, meant to sort of undo the constitutional inequality that was built into the system, had never been passed. And so she set about really trying to bring awareness to the topic and to also help women and men understand how damaging it was really to society at large. And once I became involved with that and actually just understood how to use a documentary to engage in conversation, it opened my eyes into what the possibility of, other projects that I could take on. And I don't know, it was sort of naive because I did leave my job in 2016. I went to, try to join a streaming startup. And when that didn't pan out, I had this notion that, it was 2016, a woman was running for president. If only, it seemed like a great idea to do a documentary on representation in politics. And I say that with, maybe people out there won't know, but it is extremely difficult to do a documentary. It's even more difficult to do a documentary about politics because there's a narrow time frame in which it can occur. It's timely. You have to capture the story or the story is gone. So, I was naive. But I wasn't so naive that I didn't seek out seasoned filmmakers. So I have partners, Grace Lee and Marjan Safinia, and they had made many documentaries. And so I was able to partner with people who really had done this before. And we couldn't have predicted the election outcome, but really what came out of that was this movement, this rise of women of color, and very much attention on immigrants and on the voices of those who had not expressed their voices before. And we decided to lean into it. And I must say that I think, again, it was my partners who were really the brave ones in saying, this is the story that needs to be told. I might have been more of the traditionalist because of the way I was brought up. And so that turned into this documentary series, And She Could Be Next. We followed Stacey Abrams in her first gubernatorial run, and Rashida Tlaib, who's now a representative in Congress, part of the squad, all these really interesting women who were bravely kind of going out there and speaking out in the Trump era. So again, when you go through an experience like that, it really changes your own viewpoint and changed my attitude towards what it was possible for me to do and what was important for me to do. Because I was coming from a place of already having accomplished sort of, some level of career success.
Yeah. And it can still be very difficult. I think, especially when you have so many years of experience, to then say, I want to switch and I want to do something different. I think something that's coming up for me as you're sharing your story is just the amount of courage it takes to step out and try something. So, it's an area that you might feel very passionate about, but there isn't necessarily any guarantee that there will be kind of an audience. The timeline might not pan out. The people that you've chosen to follow may not necessarily end up being the candidates that make it into office. And so in all of those different pieces, and you were taking major risks as part of this process, right? How did you go about kind of dealing with the uncertainty of all of that? And then how did you, even as like in part of the planning process and like kind of developing out the logistics of all of these pieces and making sure that they were happening in the face of so much uncertainty?
Well, okay. So the thing that might be different for somebody else who wants to also follow their passion is, or not, it's just having a clear-eyed view of what you need to sort of support yourself while you're going through this uncertain period. Because I think you and I were talking earlier, it can look like the success or the completion of the product was preordained, but it was not. The minute you start your fundraising, that's all you do is fundraise. And, that is, and at the same time, you're working against the clock that the story demands. And that is not at all, it could have totally, a trajectory that could have occurred is that nothing happened, that we didn't complete our documentary, or that the storylines really weren't worth telling. Because you don't know when you're starting out what story, you have a sense of it. You have a sense of who's interesting and who people should know about. But a lot of things happen in the course of an election and in the course of any story that you're telling. So I would say I did have a sort of financial cushion, and that is something that is worth saying because not everybody does. And if so, maybe for someone else who's starting out at a different point, maybe it's not worth quitting your day job to go out and do this. And that means that you're, doing two things at the same time. I guess people call it their side hustle, but you have to be realistic about following your dream. I mean, maybe that's the immigrant part of me, but like you need to pay the rent or the mortgage, and you need to take care of your family if you have a family. The other thing is a little bit more, I think I'm just stubborn, or, because I didn't know exactly what to do, but I knew I knew about pulling in resources, and I knew to be cognizant of what I didn't know. And so that's a bit of humility, right? It's saying, okay, I want to do this story, but I don't know. I have never made a documentary on my own. I have helped someone else put their documentary together out into the world, but that is not making it. So that's where finding my partners was essential. And, in many ways they are the experienced documentary filmmakers. I was the impetus for the project, but not necessarily the person who, put the whole thing together. And so understanding that means you also give away, obviously, some of the control of and the project outcome. But in the end, it, at least in my situation, it worked out because, I have something you can look at and say, oh yeah, it was an accomplishment, right? So.
Yeah. And thank you so much for sharing that, because I think there's this huge truth in that when we, especially as women, I think there's often this huge fear around risk taking, particularly when there is such a, like the outcomes are very unclear, and it's done in a moment where there isn't really clarity, in terms of what anything could pan out as, but you're taking the risk and putting your foot down based on your values when you're creating something like this. And so it's really, I think, eye-opening, but also very kind of important to hear for a lot of folks, because I think it might not always be apparent when you're looking from the outside in what the challenges were, and how really, I think the most important step was, in some ways, just having the courage to be able to go out and venture out into this space without having any sort of certainty about what the outcomes would be. And still being willing to take the risk and make the connections and learn through the process.
Absolutely. And, I think I'm not saying that working in a team is always the right answer, but I found, movie making or content creation is absolutely a team effort. And is it annoying? Absolutely. It is annoying to have to constantly negotiate and compromise with other people. On the other hand, it is also rewarding. Ideas come out that are not your own, that are better for having collaborated. And the truth of the matter is if I hadn't collaborated along each step of this journey, then I wouldn't have this body of work to show for it. So I highly recommend finding partners in crime, even if it's not filmmaking, it's a different kind of project. I think, for one thing, it sort of validates your vision. If you can find another person who thinks your vision is cool, well, that's something. And then maybe you can find a couple of people. Maybe you can find a group. I mean, there's something to that. There, you get energy from each other. When the going gets tough, you broaden your resources in terms of who else, money, time, ideas. I don't know. If I had advice, that would be the advice: is really be honest about what it is you can do, and then try to find good partners. So don't just jump into the first partnership. Good partners who can really complement your deficiencies.
Yeah. And how would you have any kind of guidance based on your own experiences of how you were able to find those good partners? Because I think that can be sometimes one of the most challenging pieces of kind of putting yourself out there, is like the uncertainty of, finding the right kind of group of people to be able to work with.
Yeah. So my flip answer is I'm a very good stalker, but I am actually. But what I have done is learned how to go out and talk to people and sort of listen for ideas. So we all have, I mean, I guess you can call it networking, but it's really being intentional about your network of people that you know. And so you're first sharing your vision of what it is. Sometimes you're sharing it to just crystallize your vision. Sometimes your vision is a bit fuzzy, like I want to do this, but you don't really know how to go about it. And so I did a lot of talking to people, and people made recommendations, made introductions, and it's also really taking a minute. Don't just jump at the first person who says yes, because they may not be the right partner. And then there's partnerships that just can be damaging or limiting or all kinds of things, right? So it's really just taking a minute to really think it through like you would any other partnership. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And are there, because yeah, a large part of it is like actually going out and talking to people, or like doing the background research and identifying who
Yeah.
you would actually want to.
Exactly. Sorry. Yeah, it's really just, if I think about that period of time, I had a lot of conversations with people, whatever, coffees, if you will, a lot. And people are so generous. They really are. I was surprised at how much I was able to get from different people that I talked to, and the introductions that were offered, and just the generosity to sort of offer advice, perspective, help me define what I was trying to do. So that, because once you're able to share it in a way that makes sense, I mean, people, if it's something worth doing, the validation comes, people will get on board. And so there's something to be said if people aren't coming on board. It's either the way you're telling it, or maybe you need to sharpen what the objective is.
Yeah. So there's a couple of different pieces in this, because I think you've kind of shared the challenges of venturing out on your own, and the way that you've been able to kind of to create and kind of end up kind of building these stories that really have made a hard hitting impact. But I'd love to know, like on a personal level, were there challenges that you faced throughout your career, like in overall within this kind of both filmmaking and marketing as an executive, that you feel like you don't normally share, or are there pieces that you would you think are really important for folks to know about?
Well, I mean, I was just thinking about the fact that I had to get comfortable with the appearance of what I was doing. We're all trained to kind of, it's nice to have a business card and, have a specific function and, all of the trappings that come with that. And there's some indefinable, like, especially when you're doing something and it hasn't really quite come together and you're just working on it, there's a vulnerability in talking to people. You've done this one thing. It's like, and then, they're thinking, no, okay, why are you doing this? And you just have to, but all of that there's a lot of internal chatter that you just have to sort of sit with. And the further away I got from that perfectly good job at Paramount, the more comfortable I was in just being in the process of creating something new. But it didn't just come overnight. And I actually think about that all the time. I remember the whole time that I was, in different corporate jobs, I would think, I really want to contribute. I want to do, I want to support, making my world a better place. But I could never figure out exactly what was the best use of my time, my money, any of it. It's just like, what is the best way to be effective? And I did get involved with organizations, but I had never taken the leap to really put myself into it. And so what I've learned after having done a couple of these projects is that conversation just doesn't go away. I'm always wondering what's a good use of my time, what's a good use of my, energy, and whether I'm doing the right thing. And then I just sort of do what seems to be the next appropriate step. I've just gotten comfortable having both conversations. But if somebody out there has a way of getting rid of the negative conversation, I'd love to know, because it's just sometimes you just go, okay, maybe I should be listening. Maybe I shouldn't be doing X, Y, Z.
I've heard actually many of the guests that have come on here have shared similar experiences, and I think the negative thought pattern is just present whenever you're doing something that requires some sort of risk. That's what I've been learning through my conversations with people. But I'm glad that you shared that, because I think that is a fear that many people have, and that may actually inhibit them from ever taking the next step onward. I once this is completely random, but I once competed as a white belt for Taekwondo in a competition, and no one else was really there. But my master said something that has struck with me, which is that you won against everyone who ever had the desire to do something but never took the initial step to actually do it. And I think that's really important to remember. And I think it's
really
very
good.
Yeah. And I think you are also sharing something very similar, which is that it's a continuous sort of thought process that you're going through in your head, and which is pushing you and propelling you forward. So thank you for sharing that. So I'd love to get into this a little bit, because you talked about being intentional and then thinking about, okay, what is the best use of my time, and what could I be doing in this moment? And it kind of leans into the question of, how do you choose what projects you want to work on, or and what specific criteria or values guide your decision making process when you're selecting a film to either produce or support?
Well, in my case, and I have supported a couple of documentaries that I haven't physically been involved with, but there is a narrative that runs across all of them. They're generally about women and power and justice. And I do think I've been influenced by the events in this country, and I've become convinced that the Desi population and other populations need to speak up, that our voices need to be heard. And I can't say I know exactly the right thing to say at all times, but I do notice that, I started out with something pretty fundamental, pretty systemic, right? The Constitution, equal rights, that sort of set the stage. And it's just spoke to me. I thought, well, this is crazy. Why hasn't that happened? And the more I learned about it, so I was sort of a student almost as I was participating in the completion of Equal Means Equal. It seemed to me the next logical step was, if politicians have been or in the way of passing something so fundamental, I mean, you would ask anybody, do you think men and women should have equal rights? It's a very small percentage of the population that would answer in the negative. But yet no one understands where the law sits and how it supports or doesn't support. And so it seemed pretty systemic and fundamental, and therefore effective and a good use of my time to tackle politics and see if there was something we could share with women and men out there about our political system and why representation was so limited to a certain class of people, right? It's generally white men, changing, but slowly. And as I learned about the political system, the next opportunity came along, which was really the opportunity to work on a feature film. And that's what I'm doing right now. I'm working on a film about fair pay activist Lilly Ledbetter, and I was asked to join the producing team by writer-director Rachel Feldman. But it felt like an opportunity to speak to, again, another systemic issue. Work is so fundamental to equality to livelihood to long-term success. It just felt like the perfect opportunity. And in all of these, the thing that's similar is that it's not just about making the film itself, that the film is a conduit to a conversation we're going to have once it's done. And then that conversation might be a conduit to cultural change. And that cultural change just might lead to some policy or some other structural change, which will make things better for a wider array of people. So I don't know that I put all that together at the very beginning, but I have certainly put that together by this point. And so the projects that excite me tend to be ones that offer the opportunity to have those conversations. I don't work on projects that are just entertainment. And that's just me. There is nothing wrong with making a really great movie that people love watching. I just tend to be attracted to projects that I think are going to be stimulating in a sort of issue-based way.
Yeah, I think that a lot of our audience would very much resonate with that. And many of us choose to dedicate our lives to doing work that is trying to make an impact in some ways. And I think this really does fall perfectly in line with that. So thank you for sharing that. So I kind of branching off of that a little bit. So in your opinion, what role does representation play in filmmaking and storytelling? And how do you ensure kind of during your process that diverse voices and perspectives are represented in the content that you end up producing?
That's an excellent question. So let me just step back and say, there's been a huge conversation about who gets to tell the story. That conversation is occurring in documentary circles, and it's certainly occurring in other, feature film circles. So the idea that if you're telling a story about a certain community, should the filmmaker or the person who is, so either the director or the writer, be from the community? Because otherwise, if you're telling a story about, let's say, an Indian community, if it's a white filmmaker, is that going to be more of a colonial lens, or it's going to be an extractive lens to the story versus, one where if you're from the community, you're going to tell it in a different way. So that's a conversation that's happening. I think that we shouldn't be so cut and dried about these things. There are plenty of really skilled filmmakers that can tell stories about a wide variety of communities. But I think it's an excellent conversation to have because for so long, it's been very limited to a certain class of filmmakers with success. And then they're telling stories and, if you will, extracting stories about other communities that are not their own. Okay, so then the second part is, how do you make sure that there's representation in the making of the film? And, it's really how you hire people. Because at every step of the way, the crew, the producing team, all of it, you're making decisions based on your lived experience. And this comes in subtle ways and very big ways. Having said that, it is sometimes difficult to find someone who is good at their job and also from the community and also available. And maybe sometimes available for the budget that you have. Because the good news, at least for the last few years, there's been such an outcry about diversity in, filmmaking that the really good people from diverse communities are working. They're working a lot. So one of the things we found as we were, for example, trying to build out a crew for Lily is, we couldn't do all female heads of department because simply they weren't available. We were shooting in Georgia to take advantage of the tax credit. They had to be, situated there. It was just simple, just sort of practicalities. But we absolutely started with the intention of looking for a wide variety of skilled professionals to fill important positions. So I think at least that's a starting place. But I do want to acknowledge that having a richer talent pool is helpful to really ensuring that there is a diverse crew, a diverse producing group, all of that, and diverse actors, of course. And that ensuring there's a long and deep pool of talent is a longer term proposition. And so different people are working on different parts of the issue.
Yeah, definitely. And there are voices who are trying to get more kind of folks from different communities to be at the table and acting, producing, directing, and all of those things. And at the same time, the film industry, which is already established, is coming in, and they have to figure out ways of like being able to work with that. And that can have its own challenges. Currently trying to work on my own production, and having to try and hire actors, I definitely can understand the challenges of trying to find someone with both enough skill, but also the kind of representation you want to have for your story, be part of that process.
And it does you no good as a storyteller to not have excellent people work on your project. So, but what I do think is it's worth going the extra mile to really search out a wide variety of people and not just stop with the easy, first answer. For example, in hiring a composer for Lily, we were told time and time again that there were a certain group of men that had more experience with this type of project. But we did persevere, and we actually found a terrific young female composer we recognize she's so talented, she's clearly on her way up. So it's just a matter of persevering. But I will say this, if we couldn't find anyone, we would have had to make the best choice for the project. And if that choice happened to be someone that wasn't necessarily, a man, it's fine. It's like, we have a lot of women working on the project. It is, not like you have to make every single decision a diversity decision, but I do want to recognize it's difficult. It's sometimes very difficult to find all the people that you need.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of these issues are much more systemic, and they're not something that we individually can tackle, but it's an ecosystem that's really trying to build it. Yeah. So I would love to kind of end with asking you a little bit about what do you think are some of the most valuable lessons that you've learned throughout your career, and what guidance would you kind of give to others who are on their pathway or who want to be involved in the film industry in some way?
Oh, I feel unqualified to give guidance to people who want to be in the film industry. I really do, because what I can say is I could recap the things we've talked about, which is really when you're following sort of an uncertain path. Absolutely, you should follow something that follow your dreams, right? Definitely. But do it in a thoughtful, pragmatic way to ensure that you are taking care of yourself and taking care of the people who rely on you. And possibly that might involve mitigating the risk by bringing in partners or reaching out to others. Sometimes partnership can also just be getting advice from people who really have done this before and listening to the advice. Sometimes people just don't listen to really good advice because they think that, part of executing on their vision is like, doing everything themselves. And there's so much great advice out there. In terms of following a film path, I didn't follow a linear film path. I am currently a storyteller for sure. But given that I didn't really start out that way and I've sort of fallen into it, I don't know. I feel a little awkward about giving other people advice who might be just starting out at the very outset and have a different kind of trajectory. I hope that's okay. I just don't want to give advice where I'm not sure it would be, relevant to them.
Yeah, that makes sense. I will also say that maybe part of this is imposter syndrome because you just I think there may not be like big tips of like, oh, connect with this type of person or do this sort of thing, but are there are there things that helped you build up the courage to pursue your projects? Or are there spaces or communities that you feel like would be valuable to gain knowledge from that you might be able to recommend to folks?
Yeah, no, I mean, so these things didn't happen by accident. I did formulate an idea and try to take a very thoughtful approach to executing it. I didn't, this is what I mean. I had an idea for a project. I found partners. I talked to people. I was sort of relentless in trying to track down funding, track down representation, like a sales agent, all of the things, trying to utilize the knowledge that I already had to try to push it forward. I didn't sit back, and I didn't leave too many stones unturned. I was pretty tenacious, and I probably took more conversations than I needed to, but I feel like it all paid off in some way, because sometimes conversations that I've had with people a long time ago have kind of come full circle. In fact, you and I met on a plane on our way to Netroots Nation, right? Now, did I need to go to Netroots? Well, maybe to meet you. But, I was trying to put myself in the company of other activists, because we were telling a story about activism. What we ended up with Anshika Next is telling a story about organizers. We thought we were talking about elections, but what we discovered is that it's the organizers who do the work day in and day out who are really the backbone of democracy, right? So just a small thing that they do. But we didn't know that. I mean, a lot of people just focus on the people you vote for, but those people do not rise out of nowhere. They rise out of these communities and the people who sort of orchestrate those communities. And so, yeah, I've actively put myself in a lot of communal situations where I could learn, I could meet people, and I could kind of accelerate my growth as a storytelling professional. And other people have started out in the industry and have achieved that growth over time by working on different projects. I didn't feel like I had the time to wait for that sort of organic growth. So I put myself in a lot of different groups and a lot of different situations where I would learn very fast. So that means, at the time I was working on documentary, so documentary filmmaking groups, and then whatever issue I was working on. And I was definitely a student as well as someone working on the project itself. And that's something that I do think is worth doing.
I'd love to end by just asking you, what are ways that people might be able to learn more about your work or be able to connect with you in some capacity? And if they want to learn kind of more about you or learn more about your projects.
Oh, well, thanks for that opportunity. So I have a website, www.nimblemediallc.com. It has a summary of the projects that I've been working on. It also has the opportunity to, contact me directly at the bottom. I'm also on all the socials as well as LinkedIn. I actually love LinkedIn as a way to connect professionally, because sometimes I'm actually not I've sort of pulled back a little from the other social media platforms as they've gotten a little fractious. And while I do need to protect my time, I am very interested in giving back or supporting others in their journey, because I feel like all of us need a little boost from time to time. And if there's something I can do or a connection I can make, I'm always happy to do that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I'll share personally, I think I kept your card for such a long time after we met on that plane, because I think you were the first South Asian woman that I've ever met who was in the film industry, and it just meant so much to me that you were there. And
there need to be more of us.
Yeah. But I thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And folks, I hope that you took a lot away from this conversation, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.